I would like to share with you some of sculpture's objectives, which put it in such a prominent place in my life. For me, sculpture is architecture, and architecture is sculpture. They have similar objectives. First, they carry a structure within them. And second, the tectonics, that is, understanding the materials used and how they relate to the space around the structure. The space of a sculpture starts with a drawing. Any sculptural composition has its value. A line can exist by itself. This is a different system of relationships to the space on a sheet of paper. For a writer, a sheet of paper can provide the realization of a thought, an idea, a plot, a philosophy. For an artist, it's different. It is the gateway to infinite space that he flies into. Through lines, through a blotch, he creates a special grid that is the essence of an artistic vision. Here is what is unique about a drawing by a sculptor, as opposed to, say, a painter. It is a different way of thinking. The paper sheet has a depth, not just of surface movement, but into the abyss, into eternity. Now, let's talk about fantastic sculpture. This is an absolutely brilliant sculpture, the Nike of Samothrace. And it has had a powerful influence in my life. I solved the mystery of this work, which perhaps guided my understanding of what realistic art, realistic sculpture should be like. And of the underpinnings that are not apparent to an untrained eye. Without this awareness, the sculptor's power is limited, reducing the constructive impact that any work of art, and sculpture in particular, should have. There is an inner core, an architecture without which sculpture does not exist. Here, let's look closer. A remarkable movement, an amazingly brave positioning of the wings, the intended hands. What is holding all this together? It is paradoxical. The anatomy is dislocated. The supporting leg is displaced. It is not where it should be, anatomically. The sculptor took it and placed it brilliantly inside, in the center. The leg should have come out of the pelvis here, like this. He moves it toward the center. This way, he supports the vertical axis from the rostrum. This is realistic art. All is as we imagine it to be, but it's not real. The functionality of this piece is in this structure. Anything can be threaded on it. Look at this example. This part becomes the core of the column around which everything is developing. Here you can guess what the wings were like and where the hands were. You can't spoil this piece because this is the bearing structure. It is made very delicately, all by shifting this leg. But the attention of a viewer is focused on other things. The way the semi-transparent fabric is twisting around the body, a wonderful female body that appears beneath it. This is all an orchestration. It is also brilliant. But the main point is that it's not nature. It is architecture inside the sculpture. This is very important. Without inner architecture, there cannot be sculpture. And the goal of the master is to camouflage it, to arrange it in a way so you can enjoy what you are seeing. Marble is a remarkable material. With its warmth and texture, it is most like those aspects of the human body. That is why it's very appealing to make sculptures from this material. Apart from being pliable, it is sufficiently soft. It can be polished easily. It can be a matte finish, or more glossy with more polished elements. I have to say that the pieces that were polished survived the passage of time much better. That is because the surface did not absorb humidity and dust, and so remained wonderfully intact. But I think that the combination of polished details with the signs of metal sculpting instruments is very interesting. It shows the type of material, that this is stone, a cut piece, and not something cast in plaster or plastic. The work should emphasize the unique properties of marble and the plasticity of the material, that it has been cut by some kind of tool. You know, mallets, chisels, everything leaves its distinct mark. Even the sand that was used for polishing. Nowadays it's the sanding paper and abrasive polishing wheels. All of these contribute to exploiting the special qualities of this material. But marble sculptures have one flaw. They are very heavy. You don't want to drag them around. In this work, this is the antiquity theme. What you see are the fragments of antiquity, an elegy, a call to stop the decay. This is how I saw the marble in this work. Sculptors commonly use other stone materials too. Stone with other, harder surfaces such as granite or sandstone. These are used in architecture. If the antique temples were created from this material, it worked organically within them. It became a part of the colossal sculpture, by which I mean the combining of the temple together with the sculpture housed inside. Together, they form one whole element. Here you see an ideal example of the synthesis of nature, architecture, and sculpture, the Acropolis of Athens. Look how it is sculpted, how it is turned into some fantastical, yet natural construction through the placement of architectural objects and their scale, and through playing with that scale. One can say this is architecture, while at the same time, all of this is sculpture. The human and the divine sculpture coming together. It is like a heavenly symphony. This is a colossal sculptural masterpiece. Let's see what is interesting about sculpture here, not just as lifeless decor, but as an integral part of this construction. We are looking at a fragment of the Parthenon, a corner. Here is the full entablature, architrave, frieze, and cornice. The sculpture here is not the passive decorative element, it is the building blocks incorporated in the construction. The surface of the wall is developed. It comes inside and shows itself constructively as these wonderful metopes. And the figures here are almost rounded, what we call an alto relief. Hence, they are also three-dimensional. So the mass is being distributed in its volume in such a way that these figures don't fade into the wall. They stand out on the surface. You see the huge rise of the cornice? Under the bright Athens sun, it falls from time to time into a very deep shade, and those figures would all vanish if they were made to be flat. This is the point. Everything here is composed for balance. This works with the depths we see behind the columns, which exist in the space between the columns and the wall. Additionally, they conform with those flutes, which are the core of these columns, just as the sculpture would. Altogether, this is a remarkable sculptural and architectural complex. Everything is in unity. And then, everything is different as we go inside. The light comes from the floor as a reflection. The Pan-Athenaic procession under the ceiling is a fantastically beautiful frieze. It is much flatter than the metopes, and you can understand why. As this light shifts during the day, and in the evening the torchlights would bring these figures to life. The play of light with the surfaces causes apparent motion, and the images come together in one ornamental movement. If we light it from below, it becomes a flickering light. The torchlights are moving. Everything is alive and moving. A fantastic view. And there, where the horses are running, there is a powerful horizontal movement along the whole perimeter, mixing with the rhythm of the vertical figures that underline the contrast of the movement. And then we see how precise this wall and its depth are. This is not a simple animation. This is much more powerful. This one temple has an amazing richness of justified sculptural solutions. And speaking of the Parthenon, I'd like to mention one other thing. Here is absolute perfection, a masterpiece. The best piece by Phidias, I truly believe. There is no other more powerful, more spatial sculptural work that I know of. Look, bearing in mind that this is a realistic image of a person, what a scaling of all dimensions, how they are positioned in space. This body in itself is a fantastic temple. It is a combination of architecture with the construction of a human anatomy, a human body posed in an unrealistically abstract position. So, this is not the kind of sculpture that we call realistic. Nothing in common. It is a spatial, architectural, three-dimensional sculpture. It is a masterpiece. And in addition to all of this, if you look at it schematically, you'll see it is a copy of the Acropolis. Let me explain the reason behind all this. A lot has been encoded here. The statue is placed at the front, to be viewed from below. This rise of the torso, this strong, powerful head, no one has created a more powerful one. Such an unbelievable structure. How pronounced the eye sockets are. How the nose works, even though it's been lost. How the figure is being visually extended further, further, further. This is an absolute masterpiece. I'm a huge fan of this work. The tasks confronting a sculptor when making any sculptural work are very similar. In this case, let's look at them, using the example of a brilliant horse sculpture by Donatello. This horse sculpture is not just a horse with a rider on it. It is a completely unique body of work, developed based on the composition rules necessary for this particular piece to occupy its particular setting. This statue is placed on a high plinth, and Donatello had to use 4 horse legs in this composition. There can't be 4 legs of the same length here. It does not work. So he places a ball here, thus closing this arch, and gets the silhouette required for this particular plinth in Padua, Italy. There is the movement of the horse's croup, powerful as a ship. And in contrast, across it, there is the rider's torso. His torso is not proportional. It is wider. And if you look from the back, his pelvis is very wide. It takes the whole width of the horse's croup. And further, the rider's legs are sculpted as a relief. They are flat. Why is that? Because Donatello was more concerned with how this wonderful horse would appear when placed in its particular space. The side facade and the legs are there strictly as ornamentation. This is very important. Otherwise, the rider's legs would be sticking out in all directions, and that would be terribly ugly. And now look. Real horses don't have such wide necks. But we see one here. Why? Because here, it emphasizes this contrast. It displays a powerful movement along the whole surface. And again, it emphasizes the torso placed across that surface. Then there's the brilliant head, and so on. Wonderfully crafted details, and they all are aligned and serve a purpose with this composition. The shape of the mane, the ornament placed here, it works with the ears, the nostrils, the way it is all curling, whirling, and goes loose again. The combination of flatness with this diversity creates the beauty of ornament across the whole statue. The movement continuously emphasizes the silhouette, which is not to be seen separately from the statue's plinth. This is architecture within sculpture. Everything is built according to the rules. Even the small figures are built according to the planes of the sculpture. There isn't a single random detail here. This is another wonderful example of architecture within sculpture. Without the architecture, any proper sculpture would become pointless. Bronze is one of the most popular materials in sculpture. Anything and everything an artist seeks to create is attainable with this medium. Every tiny detail can be cast. This is cast as a single piece. It is hollow, as is any sculpture cast in bronze. Even large monuments are hollow inside, but the surface here opens brilliant opportunities for sculptural explorations. Every drop, every movement, every nail scratch lives in this piece. It is an absolutely handmade sculpture. You see the lashes? Every detail. Bronze gets it all. And if you can think in this material, if you understand the casting process, or if you are very lucky and you can cast it yourself, then, when you create a piece, you create it for the future in a material in which it will have to live. You see it while sculpting. It is not just a mechanical transition of an abstract idea into material. It is thinking in metal and working in metal. The opportunities are great. You just have to use them correctly. These textured pieces are made in a similar process, starting by assembling the sculpture's initial form from wax, then casting the bronze as a single piece using the wax prototype to create a mold to accommodate molten bronze. It also has its unique qualities, its richness. It all is assembled first with wax, and then eventually cast in bronze as one piece. And we get an interesting effect from that very technique. Look at the difference in these pieces. Every technique has its unique qualities, its own originality. This diversity is endless. As many artists and hands as there are, is how many versions there could be. These artists are creating using their own individual skills and sensibilities that are unique to them. This is a sculptural skyscraper. It is made of volumes, as is any architecture, and has a spirit of verticality. But it is very important here to understand the tectonics of the material, what makes it art, apart from those volumes that are in contrast or complement each other. This piece is made of sheet metal, and the thickness of the metal is emphasized by a variety of techniques. It is not as massive as it looks, not a heavy piece. It is hollow inside, but has a powerful form that serves as a sculptural image. An additional material is being introduced here, also as a sheet of different color, to emphasize the density and darkness of this material. Taken together, this begins to work emotionally. And even where there are welded seams, punched holes, cutouts, burns, it shows that this is a metal sheet, that inside it is hollow. Also, to encourage the perception of this dark material, various color elements are introduced, melted glass or enamel. It begins to evoke the perception of the main motive, and the work is assembled based on these contrasts. This would be impossible otherwise. It would be a fake. We would be trying to cheat the viewer and turn this into a cast bronze piece. That would be wrong. It would betray the tectonics of the materials used here. This applies to everything, not just this piece. It applies to works in stone, wood, house construction, house cladding. All of this is important as the eye sees everything much deeper than we can imagine. There is a particular pleasure for an artist in this, to play with what is given to him. Very unexpected things come up during the work. As you are cutting a piece of paper with scissors, you understand how the paper is resisting, bending, and you retain this insight. This is, again, an improvisation. A work of art can't live without it. It is working with material. It is the active work of a sculptor. Sculpture is the life of a shape in space. And the material, without a doubt, affects the language in which you are talking with your audience and the piece itself. The contact of an artist with the piece happens through material and through understanding of its tectonic characteristics and possibilities, whether it is a copper sheet or foil, or a piece of granite, which requires a different approach, or marble that is available for more detailed modeling, or bronze that can accommodate anything at all, any movement of the human soul or hands. But this does not mean that sculpture can't be made of cardboard, or plastic, or any available material. A sculpture can even be made out of paper. The point of the form is set by a place and the sculptural task that a sculptor is facing. Here, the success of the applied sculptural method depends on how far ahead I can see and understand how a sculptural method would work in bronze.
От этого зависит успех примененного приема пластического.
See how it becomes shiny? Beautiful, isn't it? You have to apply water, otherwise the clay turns dry, and it is impossible to mold it. Now it is much easier to imagine how it will look in material. The metal quality of the surface is showing. I see now that it all makes a sound, how it's buzzing. I'm okay with that at this stage. And when I cast the parts in bronze, I check. And I either confirm my direction or not. It turns out that I confirmed it. It is evident that the applied approach is absolutely right. So this is surely bronze. First of all, a sculpture must have an effect by its shape, and then by its subject. For example, when you are having an emotional reaction to rocks, falling stones, a beautiful tree, you are not getting into the content. You have an emotional response that either brings you down or elevates you with admiration. Sculpture is the same. Apart from what it depicts, it has to carry the philosophy of the development of a form. One can argue it's a formal side, but I think this is the essence. It is the real depth of the work, to which other things can be added. In this case, this is an autonomous piece. Everything is in place here. Everything is painted and cast and assembled into one whole piece. A certain calculation is embedded here, a composition, direction of the heads, of forms, the number of small and large folds, the direction of the movement. This flaming flight. It has to be in this work, otherwise it is pointless. There won't be this feeling that I want to evoke in all the viewers. That's what it is. Work in form. Here is an amusing composition. This idea for the monument is that we all are flat as shadow, passing through this life, but some get to leave an imprint, like Brodsky in this case, who was a poet. It all looks like flat sculptures, but placed in space on a plinth going into the courtyard, they turn the whole composition into a round sculpture. This is an important point. This is because we alter the space and create the architecture in and of the space. We add the garden, the Sadovia ring road, then push this space into the courtyard, make it deeper, thus connecting that inner space with the outer space. Plus, people can step up on the plinth and become part of the composition. They add to the scale, and all have a chance to try themselves on here, to feel who they are, where they are going, what they live for. That is the idea. Placing a monument while not interrupting, disturbing, or intruding into the existing urban landscape is crucial. Rather, we should seek to connect the space and monument together. This is what working with the space means. The courtyard opens up. It becomes bigger, more airy. The monumentality is not in the physical size, but in the sculptural idea that is set in a piece. If there is architecture in it and a sense of scale, the piece can be of any size. This is the work of inner scales, the sculptural idea, and the architectural design embedded in a piece. Let's talk about the Gogol monument. It was a great monument, but here is what we see today. I don't want to berate this monument. It is just out of place. It took someone else's place, and look, judging by its shy pose, by how unbalanced it stands, he is obviously worried himself that he took someone else's place. Here is a piece that was done according to some canons, but it doesn't carry within itself any movement, spirit, image, or sculptural idea. Here stands a professional artist's model wearing Gogol's wig, with an artificial nose attached to it, wearing a hat. This is not a character, this is a mime. This is a model who was put here, dressed up, molded. It has nothing to do with art. Some craft, yes. And here, there are many distortions here. If you look for anatomical details in Gogol's monument, you'd get confused. There are none. Here there is movement. A turn, a space. There is a movement of a head. This is working with space. And this piece, it embraces the space. There is air around it. There is a sense of place. It could be on a table, anywhere, in any size, and so on. It is not monumental art. This could be an ink pot, a wine cork, anything but a monument. And here is an image. Look at the combination of the dimensions. Such a simple solution in plinths, how it flows into this figure, how it flows, and ends with a head. And at the top is this star, this jewel, this bending Gogol. With his nose. Everything is here. The artist here is above anatomy. He works with sculpture. He sees it as a whole. Sees the boulevard, the city, the lampposts. All of this is one whole complex. And only then it becomes a single piece of art.
потрясающе стилистически выдержанный
Wonderfully observed in style and details,
монументальный
a monumental
входящий
complex, a flowing boulevard.
замечательно сочетающий с окружающим.
It works perfectly with the surrounding trees,
И разговор о том, что
and
он
the
был
discussion
меньше
about it being
того,
smaller is
вовсе не
irrelevant,
уместен, потому что кроме
because apart from a
физической
physical
доминанции,
dominance, there is an
существует
intellectual one.
интеллектуальная доминанта.
This wonderful monument had it all. Thank God it was not destroyed. It is kept in a courtyard where Gogol lived for some time and where he died. But it is a very tight fit for it there. Many say it looks cozy there. No, it does not seem cozy there. It is as if Gogol died twice. He died in that courtyard, and the monument was brought there, put there. A great monument. Gogol does not deserve this. It should be put back. And for this monument, pretty regular, indifferent but regular, a deserving place can be found. The brilliant Andreev sculpture, it should be returned. We are talking about the monument to the singer Bulat Okachava. This is also an urban complex that follows the ideas of a monumental sculpture. Here we have pedestrian Arbat. We have a cramped space. And in this cramped space, we had to put a monument. What do we have as a result? Bulat grew up in this house, in this courtyard. The house had to suffer, such a heavy building was added to it, and for some reason in the middle of the courtyard. And, as Bulat used to say, if my courtyard dies, I die too. This is how it happened. So I saw this space as his courtyard, and I moved his yard here, and then it became the yard.
Иди сюда, иди сюда. Иди сюда, иди сюда. Гуля, 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 гуля. Иди сюда, иди сюда, сюда.
Here is an Arbat courtyard, a table, some benches which were in every Arbat yard. This is the setting for many generations of intelligentsia, and generally the residents of the city center, the Arbat. The common features, pass-through courtyards, diagonal arches, you can see it all here. This is not just a monument to Bulat Okachava. This is a monument to the Arbat courtyard, to the unique community, writers, intelligentsia, who grew up and lived here. We tried to keep that spirit. And the monument to Bulat, who came out of this courtyard. If we look slightly from above, we can see that this is a platform going into the perspective. Plotnikov Lane, these huge houses which we talked about, that are around here creating shade in the courtyards. And here is the first arch in the space, the second arch, and between them a table and Bulat's figure, who is entering from the Arbat. So he's moving here. And inside, in this space, is his bronze shadow. He left, and the shadow stayed. So this is the design of the monument. Here we have a spatial drawing on this composition and the flow of people as they come and go. Move around the Arbat. Go through this monument. And all this goes into Plotnikov Lane and into the perspective. an image much broader than a portrait of one man. It is a portrait of an era. In monumental sculpture, it is very important to understand the intended place for your sculpture. The ways in which a square, a street, or a space where your sculpture would go is developing. Here, I'd like to tell you about an absolutely brilliant work by Michelangelo about the Capitoline Hill, entirely designed by the great master. And it is surprising how the understanding of the space by a sculptor turned it into a brilliant solution for city planning. Let's see how many insights there are that not every architect could come up with. But a sculptor would understand this, and he sculpted the space. Michelangelo's genius is also in the fact that he put aside his own ambitions and did not put his own sculptures there. He used brilliant pieces, but not his own, and created a great sculpture out of them. Look how the ramp, built in a reverse perspective, moves the square closer to us, reduces the distance between us and the square, and by climbing up, we see that the buildings are placed the same way, in reverse perspective. That was the Senate building that is moving towards us. By pushing these buildings close together, he elevates this hill and turns it into a plinth for the statue. And the glorious statue of Marcus Aurelius is the mediator between people and the buildings, as well as being the best horse statue in the world, in my opinion. Further on, all the facades are sculpted. They are raised. They have an inner space. And thus, they don't cut off the architecture, but give the space an opportunity to enter these buildings. But more than this, in order not to lose this sculpture, look how he creates the graphic element of a square in here. An elongated ellipse, not a circle that anyone could have come up with, but an ellipse. And as you walk up, in perspective, you see this ellipse as a circle. I also want to mention that the square itself is elevated, so that you understand how the miracles in space are done, how a man can feel himself a man without knowing it, how he is made comfortable. Bear in mind that this is the Renaissance period, when there was an interest in the individual. So here, the individual is not crushed, but elevated. This is how it is brilliantly done by the sculptor. The best complex in Rome, in my opinion. Altogether, this is sculpture. This spatial narrative, using various possibilities and materials, graphics, bronze, stone, all of it together. But this doesn't mean that this is the only solution. There are many options. The style can be different, and an approach can be different. It can be dictated by a specific situation. Let's see how this can be approached in a modern city.
Интересная задача.
Here is an interesting challenge. Modern buildings standing next to a
Рядом
church.
с храмом. Старая
Old Moscow,
новая
New
Москва,
Moscow,
различных
different materials.
материалов. Как это
How to bring it
соединить?
together.
Как сделать так,
How to
чтобы это
align this space with a
пространство не
modern person,
противоречило
a pedestrian.
человеку сегодняшнему, пешеходу. Вот здесь идут
Here come some
фигуры из
stainless steel
нержавеющей
figures.
стали. Материал не
The choice of
случайно
material
выбран.
is
Толстая,
intentional.
листовая, нержавеющая
A
сталь,
stainless steel
6
sheet, 6 millimeters thick.
толщиной. Органично
It fits
вписывается
organically
в
into the
комплекс
complex with
стеклом,
glass,
фонарями,
lampposts,
с
with stainless
элементами
steel elements used in this
нержавеющей
architecture,
стали, использованной в этой архитектуре. И становится
and it
переходным
becomes a transitional
масштабом между
dimension
человеком
between a
и вот
person
этими
and these
огромными
huge, tall
высоченными
buildings.
зданиями. Это прохожие.
These are
Они также
passers-by.
идут по
They are
этой
walking
жизни,
in
по
this city
этому городу,
just like
как мы
us.
с вами. Таким образом,
That was how the space is made cozy and acceptable for a person to exist in.
Человека.
This is the goal of a complex approach to a spatial architectural solution. And it is not in conflict, either with the wonderful church or with the Golden Dome. This becomes a symphony where the chosen material and the chosen space have come together.